Want to show your support for your Philly teams? Check out PhillyGoat.com. They have all of your needs covered, whether it's Sixers, Flyers, Eagles, Phillies, Union, Philly boxing, Philly culture, or Philly pride. There's something for you. Tees, hoodies, hats, any color you want, any size you want, including kids. Go to PhillyGoat.com. Use the promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off your order. That's PhillyGoat.com. Be sure it has the authentic goat on the sleeve, and use that promo code Jim Montgomery for 10% off of your order. What's up, everyone? Welcome to Back to the Future, the podcast that takes a trip down Philly sports memory lane. I'm your host, Jim Montgomery. Welcome to another great episode. This is episode 51. We're starting our trek to episode 100, so we're only 98 away, or 99 away, I guess. But be sure to like and subscribe this. I got some fun things and good things on the horizon that I'm working on. The best way to stay in the loop is to subscribe, so that way everything gets sent directly to your inbox. Be sure to tell people about this. If you're listening, that means you enjoy it. Doing whatever we can to try to grow. So all those likes, all those subscriptions, all the views, all the listens, it all helps. Buy a t-shirt too, because all of that helps. Not only does it help us, it helps you because you get the 10% discount, and it also helps out Philly Goat. Also, for those of you who don't know, I do have a daily podcast, This Day in Philly Sports History, where we take a look at this day in Philly sports history. Also look at the pulse and the state of the current state of the Philly sports that are going on now. So be sure to check that out every day, This Day in Philly Sports History, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. As I mentioned, we're working on some new things, so stay tuned. I'm excited about it. I don't necessarily want to throw some things out there because I'm not really sure how it's going to work out, but busy behind the scenes getting things done. I do apologize for this being a little bit later. This is sort of my busy time in my day job, back to school, so we're trying to get things. So heading to Penn State this afternoon, so I wanted to get this done and post it last week, but obviously I didn't have time. So before I make that boring 3-hour drive from Montgomery County to Center County, wanted to get this out here for you. But first, if you want some good extensive Phillies coverage, check out our friends at 2008 Phils. They have the world's biggest Phillies email newsletter, lots of great content, and for a limited time they're offering Back to the Future listeners 75% off their subscription. Check the link, or the link that's in the description for access to your subscription. A subscription gets you access to everything they have on their site, everything behind the paywall, the archives, so many good articles, so many good discussions on their discussion boards. You get the 2008 World Series Championship banner t-shirt. You get access to raffles and drawings for tickets and memorabilia, autographs, all kinds of cool stuff. I've mentioned it on This Day in Philly Sports History. I'll mention it here if I haven't. There's a 1980 powder blue championship banner shirt out there that's phenomenal. So be sure to check them out. 2008 Phils will follow your Twitter account, which is if you're trying to grow. He has a good following, and it's actually a very good follow in and of itself. So be sure to follow them. All of this for $2 a month, $20 for the year. I think it's worth it for the content, plus you get the t-shirt. So be sure to check them out. It's in the link below. 2008 Phils, currently 75% off of a subscription specifically for Back to the Future listeners. All right, so it is the dog days of August. We're so close. Next weekend is college football week 0. I don't know how that works, but there's meaningful college football to be played next week, so we're excited about that. But going to take a sort of negative turn this week, and it is the the anniversary of the 94 Major League Baseball players' strikes. Occurred on August 12th. It would have been a little bit more timely had I got this out earlier in the week, but hey, it is what it is. In this week's episode, we're going to look at the impact it had on the game of baseball, and more specifically, what impact it had on the Phillies. But first, a little history. The current the previous CBA expired the end of the year in 1993, and since they didn't have something in place, they had a working agreement where basically they were working off of the old CBA until they could try to get it figured out. Salary cap and revenue sharing were some of the big sticking points. Obviously, the owners wanted, the small market teams wanted to share the TV deal money. They wanted to put a salary cap in to make sure teams like the Yankees weren't overspending. But there was definitely like a lot of animosity and mistrust on both ends. The players didn't trust the owners. The owners thought the players were just greedy, looking for money, blah, blah. Typical labor disagreement stuff. But the big thing, again, was that whole small market versus large market where you had teams that, like the Yankees who were spending, the Mets who were spending, and then teams such as like Cleveland and Baltimore, Minnesota, Kansas City that were saying, crying poor, like, hey, we don't have the money to compete because we can't offer this and we don't have players coming. And I'll get more to how the Phillies fit into that in a little bit, but it just, the players were like, hey, pay us, like we want to stay, like team players from like the Reds and even the White Sox to a certain point, like the teams wanted to play, or players wanted to play with there, but the teams just wouldn't pay them, so it made it hard. So that's why you saw it started to get very top heavy with some of the bigger market teams because they were the ones that were paying all the money for free agents. Owners, of course, were crying poor. They're like, we're not making any money. Because we can't keep the players, we're not able to field a team. And because we can't field a team, nobody's coming and blah. It's just like the never-ending cycle. However, I doing some of the research for this, I found it kind of odd that the players really thought that the owners would not form a united front. They felt that ultimately the owners would do what's best for them and not really come together and help. They said, whatever. I think Oral Hershiser was the players rep at the time and basically said, whatever, you guys are going to get rid of this guy, bring somebody else in and fold and give us what we want. Quite the opposite happened. The owners, not only did they dig in, they were in it for the long haul. Like they were expecting it to last all through 1995. They were talking about replacement players. They basically were like, hey, you guys want to do it? Do what you got to do. We're going to try to make some money. So they were in it for the long haul and surprisingly very unified. I think the only two that were not necessarily with everyone was Marge Schott, who was a whack job anyway, and then Peter Angelos for the Orioles, who at the time was making a ton of money off of the opening of Camden Yards. So didn't really work in the players' favor for that, and not really what they had expected. They set August 12th as this is the day we're going to walk out. And truthfully, they didn't think it was going to get to that point. They thought even if, for some reason, the way they did, the owners were unified and dug their feet in, they thought that, all right, there's no way they're going to let, because they figured if August 12th was strategic because it gave them enough time to sort of get some negotiating in and not lose the postseason. And they figured once you start having worries and fears about not having postseason, because at that point it had never been done before where there was no postseason, they just figured, we'll figure it out. Well, August 12th came, or before that, on August 1st, the owners didn't make their almost $8 million payment to the players' pension fund, kind of a FU to the players. And the players finally were just like, all right, August 12th it is. They think we're playing, but we'll show them. So they played their last regular season game, or last game before the strike, on August 11th. And then from there, like they just couldn't get anything done. Eventually in September, Bud Selig, who was the acting commissioner at the time, I don't think he was official yet, um, had to make the decision. I think it was mid-September that they canceled the World Series and the playoffs that year. And then the owners really doubled down then. They fully expect it and said, we're bringing in replacement players for spring training. They implemented a salary cap because they figured, hey, you guys are on strike. We're going to put this salary cap in. Ultimately, that never took hold, and we'll see. So then the players were like, well, they filed an unfair labor practice complaint with the Labor Relations Board, which actually made it all the way to court. And future Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who was a federal judge in New York at the time, actually upheld the players' complaint, which effectively ended the strike. So after 232 days, they finally got back to play. So what was the impact? Well, for all the teams, or for Major League Baseball, I should say, there was no postseason in 1994, and that would have been the first year with the wild card. And I'll tell you what, it would have been a great postseason because you had the Yankees who were really starting to come on. Like they were right before they became like that season. They had one of the best records in baseball. They had that team in the Central. The White Sox and the Indians were battling for the division. Likely, whoever didn't win the division would have been the wild card in the American League. And then the AL West was kind of crappy, but like all teams were under 500, but they were all within 5.5 games. So that would have been an interesting division race down the stretch that obviously we didn't get to see. And then in the National League, the Expos were, I believe, had the best record in baseball, but they were leading the NL East. The Reds and Astros were in a battle for the division. The Giants in the National League West were battling with the Dodgers. So like you would have had the Reds, Astros, Giants, Dodgers battling for the wild card. Like it would have been a fun postseason race. It would have been a fun postseason, but unfortunately we didn't get to see it. The fans were pissed and attendance dropped, and even the fans that would go to the game. And I'm thinking back, I don't remember going to. I don't know if I went to a game until I got to college after that 90. I'm sure I have. I would have had to have gone to a game. But anyway, the fans that did come showed their frustration. They booed the players. They booed the owners. They had signs. It was like old school WWE where they had signs and everything in the crowd and ripping everybody. But I think the biggest impact was on the Expos. Unfortunately, because of the way there was no CBA, like they had a ton of players on that team that they had to get rid of. You had Marquise Grissom they got rid of, Moises Alou. Why can't I think of it? Because Pedro Martinez, who like they were just a stacked team, and unfortunately they had to drop their payroll in order to survive. Obviously, what that does then is impacts the fans because the fans don't want to see it, and ultimately it killed baseball in Montreal. They moved to Washington in 2004, and we know kind of how that played out. They won the World Series in 2019 because it was right after Bryce came. So it really ultimately killed baseball in Montreal, but there was just a sour taste just in everyone's mouth from both sides. Usually you can see somebody will take this person's side or this side. People hated both the players and the owners in this one, and it just was not good for baseball. But looking at the Phillies, I mean, they were the defending National League champs. So the fact that there was no postseason, I guess technically it was true, but I do remember saying, "Hey, we are still the defending National League champions. We're the defending division champions, and nobody's won the National League East since we did." And I remember going through that whole 1995 season with that kind of in my head, like, hey, and I know that's silly and doesn't mean anything, but they weren't going to make the playoffs that year, even with the wild card. They were like 20 games back of the Mets in the division, and then like 13 or 14 back of the Braves for the wild card. So They definitely weren't getting in. Or, I'm sorry, no, sorry, they weren't. It wasn't the Mets and the Braves. They were 20 games back of the Expos. I just said it. Sorry, just thinking ahead and everything. So they were 20 games back. excuse me, of the Expos, and then they were 14 games back of the wild card, where there was a couple teams tied there. So I do apologize for that. But injuries caught up with them, and I think that was what the impact was. Like 93, if you think back, they didn't really have many injuries at all. So the fact that they're the defending champs, they had played into October, obviously, and then they had actual injuries to deal with, I think also led to them having the decline in 94. But even bigger than that, despite the fact they only had the 2 winning seasons from 1984 to 1993, and the 1 winning season was the 86 team that I think they finished in second place, but were like 22 games behind the Mets. So they were a winning team, but they had no shot. They actually, I think, would have made the wild card had there been a wild card that year. But anyway, so from 84 to 93, they averaged 2 million fans, which is pretty decent. Now the average is 3 million or so, or that's sort of like the benchmark you want to go to. But the final years then at the Vet after the strike, they only averaged 1.6 million. So it did have an impact on the team. And I mean, some people would say, oh, well, the team wasn't that good, so that sort of led to that. But they were drawing when they were not that good from 84 to 93. And there's some pretty bad teams in there. The problem ultimately was they spent like a small market team. And part of that was due to not having the revenue coming in with only 1.6 million fans a year. But it just was one of those things that used to drive me crazy. Like, why are you spending like a small market town when you're the 5th largest market in the country? That's all Scott Rowland ever wanted, was them to spend money like they had it, and is what actually led to him forcing his way out of town. Phillies weren't talked about on sports talk radio. I do remember I was a big listener of sports talk during this time, and it was all Eagles. When the Sixers made their run in 01, obviously they took over. When the Flyers got mixed in there, when they were good, everybody talked Flyers, but there was no baseball talk. I even read an article, and I forget who wrote it, but one of the guys that worked at WIP said like it was almost like a mandate that no, we're not talking baseball because nobody cares. And I mean, the attendance numbers showed that, but man, it's just frustrating that they were a small market mindset in a big market. And it actually took until Citizens Bank Park and Jim Tomei to come in for them to finally fully recover. And we know after that happened, they went into the golden era. And you see what happens now. The Citizens Bank Park is like the place to be when the Phillies are good. Like, it's just a fun place to be. Baseball wide, though, it took until that 98 home run chase between McGuire and Sosa to really bring back. And I remember that just living at the fraternity house then, and like it was like must see TV whenever they were on. Like we were watching it, and I think what happened though, you have now this. It brought the game back from the dead, basically, but at what cost? Because guys like McGuire and Bonds and Sosa, because they use steroids, now can't get into the Hall of Fame. So those records that everybody was invested in, that you really use to get yourself back from the dead of the strike, don't really count. So it's kind of one of those things. Things did start to go back into the late 2000 teens. Things started dipping off. There was a big push about just recently even about making baseball faster and things like that. So that led, there was finally another lockout, but didn't cost any regular season games. But it did lead to some of these rule changes that we see with the pitch clock and no shift and things like that. But it was a pretty, baseball was on life support really after that strike. And like, especially nationally, probably not as much, but locally here in Philly, like it was, the Phillies were like a forgotten thing there for a while. But luckily, we work our way out of it, and we do now have the World Series title to show for it. Hopefully, the Phils are set to make another run this year. But tell me your thoughts. Like, what are your thoughts on the strike? I know everybody had thoughts on it back then, so let me know. Follow me on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, Jimbo_Mont, Instagram, Philly Jimbo. Be sure to like and subscribe and tell somebody. Check out This Day in Philly Sports History every day. We're close to football. This time next week, we're going to be watching football highlights because there have been games on. But go enjoy your weeks. Try to squeeze the last little bit out of summer. I'm Jim Montgomery. This is Back to the Future. And until next time, I'll see you when I see you.